Well, let's bring in Autoblog Editor-in-Chief Greg Migliore to discuss this more. So, Greg, first, talk about what this means then. Now that Ford has reached this tentative agreement, what does this mean for GM and Stellantis and the pressure that it puts on them?
Hey, good morning. So this is an unquestioned victory for the UAW. They got a good chunk of what they were actually asking for in these negotiations. And now for Ford, this is basically over. The workers are already being told to go back to work. So that restarts very important factories that build like the Ranger, the Bronco, the Super Duty. And that's a competitive advantage for Ford at this point. Now, if you're sitting in a C-suite for General Motors or Stellantis, you realize you're down factories, you're down inventory, critical vehicles are not being produced. So at this point, the other two of the Detroit three are going to be looking to make a deal. And the pattern essentially is there at this point. 25% wage increase with COLA, it gets up to over 30%. A lot of, I would say, touchstones that the UAW was looking for, they were able to get from Ford. And also, I think it's a fairly livable deal for Ford, too. The original, numbers we heard were like a 40% increase over the length of the contract. It seems like through negotiation, they were able to kind of bring that down a little bit. They made some concessions in other areas. And, to me, it seems like perhaps in the next few days, over the weekend, Ford and Stellantis are going to be very motivated to get this done.
And so, Greg, what's the mood like on the ground there among auto workers? Because this was about sort of making up for a lot of the concessions they made during the financial crisis, as well as future-proofing some of the advancements and investments that these companies are making in EVs.
So if you go back 15, 16 years during, the start of the Great Recession, the UAW did, give a lot of concessions to the Detroit three to try to make those companies viable at the time. Fast forward, 15 years, and Sean Fain, the UAW president, said, hey, it's time for, the companies to try to, reverse that, if you will, and make it more of a level playing field. So I think they did that. And I think they also were able to make it so it does appear to be a sustainable business model going forward. I know there's been a lot of concern about labor costs, but one of the interesting things about the UAW deal is now the Detroit three pretty soon will know what their labor costs are for the next 4+ years. That's not true in many other industries.
And so when people look back and they look at how Sean Fain really negotiated this, and as you know, sort of played the big three against each other, how does this, you think, set the stage for how perhaps other unions or perhaps other auto companies might move forward with similar situations?
I think it was a masterful job. I think he sensed that the mood to support labor in this country has never been higher, starting right in the Oval Office and on both sides of the aisle. So I think he tried to capture a moment and use it as leverage to get as much as he could out of the negotiations. I think he did a good job of doing it was a national strike, but it was targeted factories. So the interesting nuance there is most UAW workers were actually working during the strike. It was just they were picking and choosing different factories, which allowed the UAW to get maximum leverage, maximum negotiating position, and also, I think, probably get the best deal they could.
And so then in terms of, if the vote goes forward and it's successful and the deal is finalized, what are the next steps in terms of the impact on the industry? How long does it take after a strike this long and so targeted to get a lot of these production lines back up and running?
So from what I've heard, some of the Ford factories are already, people are going back to them like today. So, Ford, General Motors, Stellantis have been making cars and trucks and SUVs for close to 100 years, more than that in Ford's case. They know what they're doing, and it's actually somewhat of a reasonable task to just restart production. So that's going to, I think, happen in pretty short order. I think going forward, both sides will have, clear structured labor costs for the next 4.5 years. I think they'll have some clarity. We don't know all of the details of the agreement, but we'll get some more clarity on, what battery plants might be included into it. And, frankly, this is about to be over with, I think. It's one of those things where you look back at the 2019 General Motors strike, which was all General Motors factories. This one, it seems like, accomplished a bit more for the union.
Certainly for there, at least laying out the blueprint for the other two to follow. Appreciate that update. Autoblog Editor-in-Chief Greg Migliore, thank you so much.